Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel. Today, I want to share something a little different, something that's been on my mind for a while now. I was 41 years old when my father died, and his last words to me made no sense at all. My name is Robert Chen. I'm 81 now, and it took me 40 years to understand what he was trying to say. My father was a watchmaker. He had a small shop in San Francisco, on Grant Avenue, where he repaired timepieces that other people had given up on. I grew up in the back of that shop, falling asleep to the sound of tiny gears clicking into place, waking up to the smell of oil and metal. He would sit at his bench for hours, hunched over mechanisms so delicate you could barely see them, and he never seemed frustrated, never seemed rushed. I didn't understand that then. I thought he was wasting his time. I was ambitious in the way young men often are. I wanted more than a small shop and a modest life. I went to Stanford, studied business, and by the time I was 30, I was a partner at a consulting firm in downtown San Francisco. I wore expensive suits. I had business cards with raised lettering. I worked 70, sometimes 80 hours a week, and I felt important. My father would visit sometimes, always wearing the same brown cardigan, always looking a little out of place in my glass and steel office building. He'd smile and nod and ask me gentle questions about my work, and I'd give him short answers because I was always on my way to the next meeting. I thought I was teaching him something about success. I thought he looked at me with admiration. Now I know he was just trying to spend time with his son. When I was 40, my father was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. The doctors gave him 6 months. He made it 7, and for most of that time, he kept going to his shop, kept repairing watches, even though his hands shook and the work took twice as long. I visited when I could, which wasn't often enough. I was in the middle of a major acquisition, the kind of deal that could make or break a career, and I told myself he understood. I told myself there would be time later. There wasn't. I got the call on a Tuesday morning. My mother said I should come to the hospital, that it would be soon. I was in a meeting. I actually finished the meeting before I left. I think about that sometimes, more than I'd like to. I drove to the hospital still wearing my suit, still thinking about the deal, and when I walked into his room, he was barely conscious. My mother was holding his hand. She looked at me with an expression I've never forgotten, something between relief and disappointment. I sat down on the other side of the bed. I took his other hand. It was thin and cold, and I could feel every bone. He opened his eyes and looked at me, really looked at me, and for a moment he seemed more alert than he'd been in weeks. He squeezed my hand with surprising strength and pulled me a little closer. His voice was barely a whisper. He said, "Robert, the watch is not the time." That was it. That was all. He closed his eyes again, and he died about an hour later, with my mother and me on either side of him, and I had no idea what he'd meant. The watch is not the time. It sounded like confusion, like the morphine talking, like the scattered thoughts of a dying mind. I mentioned it to my mother at the funeral, and she just shook her head. She didn't know either. I went back to work 2 days after we buried him. I threw myself into the acquisition, worked even harder than before, and when the deal closed successfully 3 months later, I felt nothing. That surprised me. I'd worked so hard for it, sacrificed so much, and when it finally happened, I just felt empty. But I told myself it was grief. I told myself it would pass. It didn't pass. It got worse. Over the next few years, I kept climbing. I made partner at a bigger firm. My salary doubled, then doubled again. I got married to a woman I barely knew because it seemed like the right time, and we had a son because that's what you did. I was never home. I missed his first words, his first steps, his first day of school. I missed everything that mattered, and I didn't even notice I was missing it. My wife noticed. She left when our son was 7, and I couldn't even blame her. I kept my father's last words in the back of my mind, turning them over occasionally like a stone in my pocket. The watch is not the time. Sometimes I thought maybe he was talking about legacy, about how the physical things we leave behind aren't what matter. Sometimes I thought maybe he was just delirious. I never came close to understanding. I retired at 65. That's what you're supposed to do, right? You work hard, you save money, and then you retire and enjoy life. Except I didn't know how to enjoy life. I didn't have hobbies. I didn't have close friends. My son was polite when I called him, but distant, the way you are with someone you don't really know. I'd spent 40 years building a career, and now that it was over, I had nothing. I started taking walks. Long walks with no particular destination, just moving through the city I'd lived in my whole life, but never really seen. One day, about 3 years into retirement, I found myself on Grant Avenue. I hadn't been back to that neighborhood in decades. The city had changed. The old Chinese businesses were being replaced by boutiques and coffee shops, but my father's building was still there. The ground floor was a vintage clothing store now, but I stood outside and I could still picture his shop. The window full of clocks, the little bell that rang when you opened the door. I don't know what made me do it, but I went home and dug through my storage unit until I found the box of my father's things my mother had given me before she passed. Most of it was just papers and photographs, but at the bottom was one of his watches. Not a customer's watch, one of his personal ones, a simple steel timepiece with a white face and black numbers. It had stopped running years ago. I took it to a watch repair shop. The watchmaker was a young woman, probably in her 30s, and when I showed her the watch, she examined it carefully, then looked up at me with something like reverence. She said it was a beautiful piece, that my father had clearly taken excellent care of it, and that she'd be honored to repair it. I told her to take her time. When I came back 2 weeks later, the watch was running again. She showed me what she'd done, explained the cleaning and the tiny adjustments, and she did it with the same kind of quiet focus I remembered my father having. I paid her, and as I was leaving, she said something that stopped me at the door. She said, "You know, the funny thing about mechanical watches is they don't actually keep perfect time. Even the best ones drift a little. But that's not really the point. The point is the craft, the attention, the care." I stood there holding my father's watch, feeling its weight in my hand, and something shifted. The watch is not the time. I went home and I sat at my kitchen table, and I finally understood. My father wasn't talking about legacy. He wasn't talking about material possessions or physical objects. He was telling me that the mechanism of a thing, the external structure, the impressive appearance, that's not what gives it meaning. A watch is just gears and springs. What matters is what you do with the time it measures. How you spend it, who you spend it with, the quality of attention you bring to each moment. I'd spent my whole life building the watch, the career, the title, the salary, the reputation. I'd made this elaborate, impressive mechanism, and I'd thought that was the point. I'd thought that was success. But I'd completely missed the time. I'd missed my father's last years. I'd missed my son's childhood. I'd missed my own life while I was busy constructing something that looked like a life from the outside. My father had tried to tell me. In his gentle way, even at the very end, he'd tried to give me the one lesson he'd learned from a lifetime of working with his hands, of fixing delicate things, of paying attention. He tried to tell me that the impressive mechanism means nothing if you're not present for what it's supposed to measure. I'm 81 now. My son and I talk more often these days. It took years to rebuild that relationship, and it's still not what it could have been, but we're trying. He has children of my own now, my grandchildren, and I see them whenever I can. I'm not building anything anymore. I'm not trying to impress anyone. I'm just here, paying attention, trying to be present for the time I have left. I keep my father's watch on my dresser. I don't wear it. I just wind it every morning, and I listen to it tick, and I remember what he was trying to tell me. The watch is not the time. The career is not the life. The mechanism is not the meaning. If you're younger than me, if you're still in the middle of building your watch, I want you to know something. The watch is important. The work matters. The things you create and build and accomplish, they have value. But they're not the point. They were never the point. The point is what you do with the time while you're here. The point is who you love and how you love them. The point is whether you were present, whether you paid attention, whether you noticed the moments that actually mattered. My father knew that. He tried to tell me. And I'm telling you now, while you still have time to understand it. Don't wait 40 years like I did. Don't wait until everyone you love is gone and you're standing alone with a beautiful mechanism and no one to share the time with. The watch is not the time. Please don't forget that.